G'day everybody, Sean from Bourbon Brothers here. I hope you're well. This is our second tasting video for our January offerings. This time we're actually looking at two bottles because they're from the same distillery. We've got the George Dickel recipe number 8 and an absolute belter in the Dickel single barrel Netflix and Chill. So let's talk about this Dickel whiskey. George Dickel is a brand of Tennessee whiskey produced in Tullahoma in Coffee County, Tennessee. Today it's owned by Diageo. The modern brand was introduced in 1964, though the distillery has a longer history. Whiskey production and aging takes place at the Cascade Hollow Distillery and is part of the American Whiskey Trail. There are precisely two major distilleries that produce Tennessee whiskey using the time-honoured Lincoln County process. George Dickel operates the second largest distillery in Tennessee. In 2013 it sold 130,000 cases, while the largest, Jack Daniel's, sold 11.5 million cases that same year. George Dickel was born in Germany in 1818 and immigrated to the United States in 1844. He founded a retail business in Nashville, Tennessee, where I've had the pleasure of living, in 1850 and began selling liquor in 1861. Following the end of the Civil War, he expanded his liquor business to a standalone liquor store and started the George A. Dickel and Company liquor wholesaling business, which focused on buying bulk liquor from local distilleries and bottling it for sale and distribution. After an accident in 1886, George's health began to deteriorate and longtime bookkeeper Victor Emanuel Schwab took over the day-to-day operations of the company. One of his first actions was to take over a large percentage of the shares of a distillery in Cascade Hollow, where their company had been producing a large percentage of their whiskey. George died in 1894 and his wife took over ownership until her death in 1916. At that point, she willed the remaining shares to Schwab, who became the sole owner of the company and the distillery. Throughout the 1900s, Schwab fought vehemently against the rising calls for prohibition, spending thousands of dollars on lobbying campaigns in Nashville and thwarting legislation aimed at curtailing the sale of alcohol on at least one occasion. In spite of his efforts, Tennessee enacted prohibition in 1910, forcing the Cascade operation to relocate to the Stitzel Distillery in Louisville, Kentucky. It was produced here until Kentucky enacted statewide prohibition in 1917. The operation shut down altogether with the onset of nationwide prohibition in 1920. Once the ban on alcohol was lifted, the Schenley Distilling Company purchased the old George A. Dickel operation. None of the recipes or processes had been written down, so Schenley had to track down the old distillers and workers to reverse engineer what had been going on. For those keeping score, Schenley is the same distillery that currently produces the Ancient Age line of blended whiskey today. Throughout the 1940s and 50s, Schenley marketed their whiskey under the George A. Dickel name. In 1956, Schenley attempted, unsuccessfully, to purchase the other Tennessee whiskey, Jack Daniel's. After their takeover attempt failed, they decided instead to directly compete with Jack, opening a new distillery roughly 1 mile from the historic Cascade Distillery and using the same Lincoln County charcoal filtration method for their whiskey. The distillery opened on July 4th, 1959, and the first bottle rolled out of the distillery in 1964. Increased production of George Dickel in the 1990s caused supply to exceed demand. In response, the distillery closed to allow the whiskey's value to rebound and mitigate some wastewater issues at the distillery. The original site of the distillery, the south end of the Cascade Hollow, was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1994. The distillery reopened in 2003, almost too late to prevent a shortage of Old Number 8 in the market by 2007. Diageo introduced a younger, 3-year-old version branded old-fashioned Cascade Hollow batch recipe to meet demand. It was discontinued in 2013 after aged stocks rebounded sufficiently. This distillery uses a 2-step distilling process. First, the spirit goes through a column still or continuous still before the batch is distilled in a more traditional Scottish style pot still. This second pot distillation is why they spell their product's name without the E, in honour of that Scottish tradition. That whiskey then takes a bit of a nap in some charred oak barrels before being filtered in what's known as that Lincoln County process. The unique spin on things that George A. Dickel introduced is the chill filtering of the spirit before it goes through the filtration process, which tends to reduce some of the heavier elements and make the spirit lighter in flavour. The charcoal for the filtration process is made from sugar maple trees, just like with Jack Daniel's. So let's look at our first Dickel offering, the George Dickel Classic Number 8 Tennessee Sour Mash Whiskey. Produced by George Dickel, it's owned by Diageo, produced in Tennessee in the United States. Its classification is a Tennessee whiskey, doesn't carry an age statement, and comes in at 40% alcohol by volume. Let's give it a crack. bit of light copper. Light to medium on the legs there. You get a heavy corn presence on that nose, and then you sort of get the typical leather, vanilla and oak grain influence coming through, a little bit of mint, and that char sort of comes through at the back end of that nose. I describe this as a slightly light body with slightly astringent flavours, a light sweetness and that oak pepper really rounding out the palate. And that finish, you get that warm vanilla finish with hints of the maple that comes from that filtering process and buttered corn. So that's our George Dickel number 8. So now let's move on to the star of the show and one of my favourite bourbons that Bourbon Brothers has done so far. It is the George Dickel hand-selected barrel, Netflix and Chill from Prime Barrel in the USA. Thank you for those guys for helping us bring it over here. Let's give it a shot. You can really see the effects of the extra aging. This one is actually up around that 11-year mark. Although it says 9 years on the label, it's actually almost 11 years in the barrel. It's a really darker copper on there with nice legs too. In fact, I'll show you the difference between the two. So you can sort of see the depth in colour and character that extra aging brings on compared to that George Dickel recipe number 8. So that nose, you get that marzipan, molasses, brown sugar and maple syrup. So it's all this sweet nose coming through. Cracked vanilla bean and some maraschino cherries. It really starts off sweet up front with caramel popcorn and candied rhubarb and baked cherries, but then it quickly transitions into baking spices, a very subtle touch of cinnamon and clove. On that finish, it's long and it's dry with a lingering soft spice and hints of cocoa and espresso. There is some heat to it. So this is not your run-of-the-mill Dickel. So it's barrel 10E26-780. So it was barreled on the May 26, 2010. It was bottled on February 10, 2021, making the actual whiskey a few months shy of being in the barrel for 11 years. This barrel stood out in blind tasting. It was also stood up against other Kentucky bourbons in its price range and easily held its own, punching way above its weight. This barrel pick comes in 103 proof. It's got a mash bill of 84% corn, 8% rye and 8% malted barley. The whiskey goes through Dickel's signature chilled charcoal mellow process known as the Lincoln County process. These barrels were aged in brand new white oak barrels that are charred to number 4 on the barrels and number 2 on the heads. So just the 2 videos this month because we've combined the 2 Dickel videos into one. Look, I absolutely love this George Dickel barrel pick. We've got a couple of bottles that we'll put on sale on the 1st of next month. So if you want one, get in quick. It's an absolute belter, one of my favourites that we've ever put out there. I hope you enjoy it and I hope you're enjoying your journey. Cheers. So let's talk a bit about George Dickel. So George Dickel is a brand of Tennessee whiskey. So let's talk about the Dickel brand. George Dickel is a blend. So let's talk a little bit about the Dickel brand. George Dickel, mate. As good as I was in the last one. I'm going house in this one. All right. George Dickel operates the second largest distillery in Tennessee, selling 130,000 cases in 2013, while the largest is Jack Daniel's, which sold 11.5 million cases that same year. I ran out of breath. Well, at least you have plenty to choose from.
I will, thank you.
Our George Dickel barrel pick, Netflix and Chill from So that's our January picks for this month. Good. There's your blue book.